Hello and welcome back to your trusted local podcast. I am Becky Phelps and we are joined today by a very special guest, Brian Tavik.
Brian Tavik, first time for everything.
First time on the podcast.
Yes.
And you've been working on a very big story impacting our firefighters here in Iowa.
So this one has actually taken me a couple months, a couple weeks to try and finally get all the pieces in place to be able to tell this story. So pretty excited to finally see this one come to fruition.
Absolutely. So first of all, let's get into it. Where did you find this story? Where did you get the idea to start working on this?
So it's pretty simple, actually. This kind of stemmed from a story I'd done, like I said, a couple months ago, specifically with the Ely Fire Department. They were talking about how their fire truck needed to be replaced. It was past the expiration date, I started asking questions. What does that mean? Your fire truck is past an expiration date? But there's this nonprofit that actually, not a nonprofit, but an organization, a federal organization that sets standards in place that puts expiration dates on equipment. Fire trucks, the clothes that they wear, they're safety equipment.
So
and
how long does a fire truck last?
25 years.
Not bad.
Not bad,
Not
right?
bad.
But that means that it was back in 2000, right? So, 2000. So
Wow.
it's time for a change. They needed a new one. $1 million fire truck in that case.
That's a pretty big amount for especially a smaller, more rural fire department to pay out.
That's where you start asking those questions. Where are you getting money for $1 million fire truck? You're talking about pancake breakfasts. You're talking about maybe some funding from the city and the other municipalities that you cover. There's also a tax levy where they do get a lot of that money, or some of their money from, but not $1 million worth. That's going to take a lot of pancake breakfast to be able to try and raise $1 million.
A lot of syrup.
Yes.
Okay.
And what $1 million, that's a lot for a fire truck, but the other equipment, that has a cost too. A kind of a staggering price tag when you're talking about just for the pants, the coat, and the boots, about $7,000 to $10,000. And that, again, is the expiration date. That expires every 10 years, which means every 10 years, they have to try and replace that gear and make sure that it's up to date with this standard.
So for each firefighter, it's $10,000 every 10 years?
$7,000 to $10,000. It's around $7,000
Wow.
for the Stanwood department, which is the one that I was able to get in there and kind of look at some of their clothing.
So this started in Ely. You talked to Stanwood. How common is this to have expired gear?
So from what I understand, it is very common, and it's something that you call 911 and you're expecting firefighters to show up your house in gear that's equipped, but in some cases that's not happening. So Stanwood did show me that they have 3 sets of gear that are currently in use that are a couple months expired. Not a crazy amount. We're not talking years. We're talking a couple months. But that does matter when you look at some of their gear. And then you talk to the Iowa Firefighters Association, and he says it's happening more often than you think, but there's a caveat. No one is checking. There is a group that holds standards, but there is no one that goes around to make sure that this gear is actually following that standard.
So there's no one making sure this is getting updated. There are, I'm guessing, no consequences for working with expired gear except the safety consequences.
Safety consequences, yeah, there's safety consequences. That's about it.
So how bad is it to be expired? So is it like, a can of beans is expired. That can probably go, a while past the expiration date. Or is it like lunch meat? Like once that is expired, you got to toss it.
I'm pretty bad. I'm not using anything expired, so I don't do that. But so again, this is safety equipment. So when you are using expired gear, that stuff has an expiration date for a reason. It is these manufacturers that are getting together with other groups and deciding how long this equipment is good for, because there are parts of it that can wear and tear, and it becomes less effective when it gets into that fire. So it does matter to the extent of how much. I don't know that off the top of my head. But when you see aging equipment, even you can see in my work clothes. I've had some of that for a while. You get holes in the elbows. It happens, But this stuff is protective gear. You want it to be up to standard. You want the people going into that fire, rescuing your stuff, your families, in sometimes in the worst case scenario, but also you want them to come home and go to their families.
Absolutely. So you went to the Stanwood Fire Department. How big is Stanwood, just to give us an idea?
614, I think it was,
Okay.
in the last census. Very small town. I think they respond to around 50 calls a year at this point, which is actually trending down from years prior, he told me, which was kind of interesting. So they're not going out too often.
So how many people do they have there at Stanwood?
In the fire department?
Yes.
I think you said 15.
Okay. And those are volunteers, I'm guessing.
All volunteers. Yep.
Wow.
Drop what they're doing, and when that alarm goes off, and they're off to the fire department to pick up their gear and head out to your emergency.
So they've got some gear laying around that has expired. Why is it still in the fire department if it's expired?
So that's a good question. So this is a part that I was not actually able to put into the story. So this is kind of a sneak peek.
This is an exclusive on the podcast.
Part about this. The people who are using that expired gear are probational firefighters. They're people who have been there for about a year. They're not supposed to. They're training. Okay. Right. They're standing outside. They're watching what's going on. And then maybe once the fire is extinguished, they can go in and get some of that experience so they can see what it's like inside there. But the dangerous part is at some points and sometimes when these fires happen, they might actually be called on. Maybe they didn't know enough people showed up, or the situation calls for more people to be inside to help, and they will take that expired gear and go inside. And here's another part of this that I was talking about. The fire chief had said that 3 of the gear that's in up to standard, new clothing, needed to be sent in repair. The fire chief and these other volunteer fire department people 3 of them were without gear that was up to standard and had to put on some of their older gear that they kept from years past, so expired gear. And we're still using that.
It's like their backup outfit.
Yeah.
And they just cross their fingers and really hope they don't have to use it.
Exactly, yeah.
But they will, because they are being called out.
Yep.
Wow. Oh my goodness. And okay, I can't imagine what it's like to be going into a fire in the first place, to have to be that brave.
Me either.
But what is it, did you talk to them about what it's like to have to use that old gear? Is that, how do they feel about that?
So the Stanwood fire chief flat out told me it's scary to think about having to go inside of this fire, this burning structure, knowing the gear you have is not up to the code.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would be scary for me, definitely. So they're dealing with this issue of having a problem updating $7,000 every 10 years. That's a big ask, especially for a volunteer department. How is Stanwood hoping that this might get resolved? Do they have any ideas?
So I'm going to back up a little bit here. When you talk about their budget, it's $40,000. That's not a very big budget. When you're talking about $7,000 for gear, he bought 2 this last year. That's $14,000 for just 2 sets of gear, for 2 more people who have been on the department for about a year and are just kind of now making those steps. So we're talking about a large sum of their actual budget going towards these suits. Now, when you say, are there some solutions? Yeah, they would like to see some type of legislation. Whether that means bringing more money to the budget, allowing firefighters to be able to see more funding coming in, or here's another way to do it is raise the tax levy. So most districts, most fire departments have a tax levy that they get from the municipalities that they have agreements with, but it's maxed out, it's capped by state law. It's the absolute amount of funding that they can get is what they're getting. So that would be a reoccurring money that they would get but I mean, it raises taxes. Obviously, you could see where that would be an issue.
It does, but the tax levy is maybe more of a long-term solution.
Yes, it'd be something that would, like I said, reoccurring money, funding that would just keep coming in for the department to be able to continue doing their jobs, buying safe equipment. So
yeah, because you think maybe like a grant or something, federal funding, but there's probably not enough of that to go around.
It's funny you say that. So they were talking about back in 2001. This is where this stemmed from. A lot of people, like I said, fire truck from 2000. 2001 was when 9/11 happened, and FEMA made a grant available for fire departments. Fire departments jumped at it, bought all new equipment, fire trucks, gear, stuff like that. But now all of that's coming to a head. It's all starting to expire, and there wasn't a backup plan for when that money's gone, because now when you're talking about that FEMA money, it's depleted. And even the guy from the Federal Fire Department Association that I was talking about, he was saying that his department actually tried to apply for that FEMA money, but there was a match attached to it, that they couldn't even match that.
Oh.
They couldn't afford to do it. So this funding is becoming less accessible and harder for departments to get.
Wow. So that was kind of a Band-Aid solution after a horrible tragedy, and they don't want another tragedy to happen before they get some more solutions.
And that's the biggest concern from when I talked to the Iowa Firefighters Association, that there's lack of money going into this, right? You buy a fire truck, you're going to have to try and skip out on maybe some other areas to try and save money elsewhere. So you have a lack of money. Mm-hmm. You have firefighters going into fires, or whatever your call is, who are now wearing unsafe equipment, and we're in OSHA state. So if something does happen, OSHA could get involved, but that's on the back end. Like I said, there's no one tracking to make sure this stuff is up to code, that these people who are volunteering their time to, when our worst day happens, they're volunteering their time to come there. There's no one tracking to make sure they're using safe equipment. So, yeah.
And how do they...
I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah,
kind of rambled.
No, absolutely. And that seems insane to us, who maybe aren't thinking about it every day, that they're not keeping track of that, but that's the reality that they live with. So
this is volunteer departments that we're talking about. So when we think of other departments like Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, some of the that have city, funding city services, they might have two sets of gear. They have more money available to them, more funding accessible to them, that they're able to do that. So yeah, it's not something that everybody would think about. This is an interesting stat. The Iowa Firefighters Association gentleman, who's actually the chief of Grand Mount, it's just east of here, not too far. But he was saying that about 90%, I think it was, of the state of Iowa is actually covered by volunteer fire departments. So not the large majority of the population is seeing that. Obviously, they live in the metro areas, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, what have you. But 90% of the state receives volunteer fire safety, or fire services. That was remarkable. And those are all of them are going through a similar situation.
That's amazing. And you see, like, the press releases that we get into the newsroom when something happens out in a rural area, those press releases often have like 4 or 5 groups tagged onto them. Like, everybody jumps in their trucks and they go to help. They do not hesitate.
Right. No.
That's amazing. But again, those smaller departments, you mentioned some of those bigger grants, some of those funding opportunities have a match attached. They don't have enough pancake breakfasts to go around often to match that.
No, I talked to Stanwood's fire chief again. You know how much they were making off those pancake breakfasts? It's about $3,000. So they're not making a ton of money off of that to try and save, and it doesn't even cover half the cost of a set of gear.
Wow. So as they're dealing with all of that, they're hoping maybe some legislation. Is anyone being proactive about that? Anyone planning to go to legislature? I mean, we recently had, I believe, some legislation passed about cancers for firefighters. I think that just went through. They've had some other successes with retirement.
Yes. So the Iowa Firefighters Association are the ones who lobbied for that retirement benefits that they received this last year. He did say that this was something that was kind of piquing their interest. It wasn't something that they were proactively looking at, but it was something that he said that they now might start talking about. After I brought it to him, though, this was not something that was on the forefront of his mind. This was an issue that I brought to him, that he was like, well, this might be something we might want to start bringing up. But also, you got to think, he was saying to get that retirement benefits, they lobbied for like 10 years. So
wow.
Very slow to get that ball rolling. So when you're talking about some of this funding stuff, you hope that it'd be a little bit sooner than 10 years.
10 years, their equipment's going to be out of date
Out of date again, yeah.
It's going to be already expired from whatever they've gotten right now. Wow. Okay, thank you, Brian, so much for sharing some insight into that story. And that will be up on our website, correct? And it does air on August 21st in the 10 o'clock news, so this probably will be out by then. And you can find the entirety of Brian's story on our website. Brian, is there anything else you want to make sure people are aware of with this? Anything that you find interesting?
No. That was fun to put together. I enjoyed the story. Very proud of it. So hopefully this turns out well. You guys enjoy it, and we'll see.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah.